Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review, Part 8, and this is session 61. Now, we just got through talking about the fact that we were twice dead Gentiles, dead in our sins, dead in the uncircumcision of our flesh because we weren't part of Israel. We were just as Paul wrote in Ephesians. I know you've seen this before, but I want to point a couple of things out about this, so we're going to look at it twice. Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision. See, that's what was just being referred to in Colossians. Who are called the uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision of the flesh made by hands, that at that time ye were without Christ. You were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. See, we weren't part of Israel. And because we weren't part of Israel, what do we know is true? That's right, and therefore he wasn't working with us. Okay? We're strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope. When you look at that, that is a pathetic circumstance to be in. Having no hope and without God in the world. What were the Gentiles always? They were worshiping every god except the true God. Isn't that amazing? Everyone but the right one. But now in Christ Jesus, ye who sometimes were far off. I know he's going to talk about this all turned around for you. What I'm after is Paul saying, here's what your condition was. You were without Christ. You weren't part of Israel. You were strangers from the covenants. You didn't have any hope. You were without God. And you were far off. Now the good part is, we've now been made nigh. All that's got to change. Would you say that's part of the riches? Oh, brother! So all you got to do is think about who we were and the condition we were in and who we have been made to be now. The opportunity has been afforded to us. No wonder the diminishing them is the riches of the Gentiles. Absolutely. So, what has been going on in this world since the fall of Israel? Let Paul give us the answer to that. Now, I am skipping down a couple of verses, but we're fixing to be right there because we're in 12. But look in 15. For if the casting away of them, Israel, be the reconciling of the world. This is another one of those verses where some men look at that and they say, you see, since God put his, and they think casting away means permanently, since God did away with Israel, now the world is reconciled. Does that mean the whole world has now been reconciled? So what is that verse saying? Yeah, we have a chance now to be reconciled, whereas back here during this program, God wasn't dealing directly with us to do that. You know what this really is? You say, but weren't there proselytes to Israel's God back then? Sure there were. But the Gentiles as a whole, guess what? They remained in darkness. Was God worried about getting all those Gentiles a message? The answer is no. Now somebody's listening to that on the video right now and they're flipping their lid. If he was interested in giving them a message, he wouldn't have consigned them over to the adversary. Was God telling Israel, you need to go to these Gentiles and you need to tell them about the true and living God? No. He said, you guys need to become what you're supposed to become. Then we'll deal with Gentiles. Here we are again, stuck in line behind Israel. And they're looking for their checkbook. If you're a Gentile, if you understand all of this, when Israel fell and brought them down to our level, and now he's offering everybody this thing, God deal directly with us, that should make you jump up and down with joy. It should make us stand on our chairs and throw confetti in the air. It should make us look at that every day and go, thank God that in His wisdom, do you realize being born at the time that you are born has afforded you the opportunity to get in on something that whole generations of Gentiles did not have. And you know why God did it? Not because we are so special. That's what we like to think. By the way, He's got a whole part here in Romans chapter 11 where He's going to say, don't boast about yourself like you think you're all that, and God just goes, oh, you Gentiles were just so great, I just had to do it with you. We were ungodly! Are you kidding me? We worshipped every false god there was. It wasn't about how good we were. Okay, now, so if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, because that is exactly what God is doing today. Is He is giving the world a chance to be reconciled. Wouldn't that be the riches of the world? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Titus chapter 2 verse 11, for the grace of God that bringeth salvation hath appeared to all men. That would be the world, wouldn't it? Was it always that way? Did salvation always appear to all men? No. Take a look at this one. John 4:22. You worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. It wasn't always this way. There are people who have lived their whole lives in churches. They think that what is going on today is the way it has always been. That God's just been dealing with everybody. He has not. And boy, that is really something to appreciate. So, no wonder Paul calls this dispensation of Gentile grace the riches of the world. I just want us to expand on that, by the way. And just to say it one more time, from the calling out of Abraham all the way to the stoning of Stephen, God never even hinted at the fact that if something went wrong with this program with Israel, that we Gentiles would have riches out of it. No one ever saw that coming. Least of all the adversary in all of his supposed wisdom. So what is God doing? Well, let's take this back now. Romans 11:11. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation is come unto the Gentiles for to provoke them, who's the them? Jews, to jealousy. Now, jealousy can be a bad thing, but jealousy can also be a good thing. Provoking can be a bad thing. You ever say to your kids, quit provoking your brother?
Not quite like that.
Okay. Quit provoking your sister. But sometimes you can be provoked to do something good. When I was a teenager, graduated from high school, I went off to Louisiana Tech University. I was going to study pre-law, and I was going to go to Tulane and go to law school. That's that all mapped out. While I'm there at Louisiana Tech, I meet a guy that I went to high school with. I didn't know him personally. I mean, I'd seen him. You know how you see people at school, you don't really know them or anything about them. You just recognize them because you see them. And this guy's name was Raymond Buckaloo. Raymond and I got to be really good friends while we were there at Louisiana Tech. And Raymond had a real heart for God. Now look, I was saved when I was 8 years old. My parents brought me up in church. We were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. If there was an all-week revival, we were there every night. If they were killing chickens at the church, we went. My folks, you know what? We read the Bible together as a family when I was a kid. They made me memorize the books of the Old Testament and the New Testament. We prayed together at night. We did all of those things. So I'm just trying to say, all of this was not foreign to me. It wasn't like I was raised up in a hooligan home where I never heard of God or had any interest in God. Everything about our life was that way, and I was raised in the midst of that. as a result, I got saved early when I was 8 years old. I've told you that story before, so I don't need to repeat it again. My uncle led me to Christ, although my mom said to him when I went to go visit, do not lead Michael to Christ. We've been talking about this, and I know he's really close. I want to be the one to lead him to the Lord. So on the way home from my uncle's, and he puts me in the front seat, he witnesses me, and I get saved. First thing I say to my mom when I get home, I run in the door and I go, I got saved! I thought my mom would be thrilled. I all remember she was glaring at my uncle. That's all I remember about that. Till I finally learned the backstory to all of that. All right, which is to say, so the things of the Lord are always there in my life. But when I meet Raymond, man, this guy really loves the Lord. And he is committed. And there's something about him that's a little different. And I can hear it. Let me give you an example. You'll think this is corny. But now, Louisiana Tech was in Ruston, Louisiana. I lived in Shreveport. So it was about an hour and 40-minute drive over there and down the interstate. So I didn't have a car at that time, so I had to find a ride. Well, Raymond said, hey, you can come with me. I go home on the weekends. I went home on the weekends. And he said, I'll just take you home and I'll pick you up when we go back. It'd be great. And I thought, okay. On the way back the first time, Raymond says, he talks to me about the Lord, and I said, yeah, I got saved when I was a kid. And he says, you know those songs in the hymn books? And I go, yeah. He said, I love to sing those songs on the way home. You want to sing some of these songs? So we sang Blessed Assurance, At Calvary, and Standing on the Promises. Am I saying songs you don't know? Okay, you know those? You don't? You do? Okay. Anyway, he just starts reading. In fact, he has a songbook in his car. It's in the glove box. And I mean, we're singing these, but because we came up as Baptists, we only knew the first, second, and last verse. We never sang the third verse. If you were ever in the Baptist church, isn't that the way it worked? You never sang the third verse. Anybody ever sang the third verse? I thought, where did that come from? This guy was just different like this. We would meet together during the week, and he would say, let's just have our own prayer meeting. And we would meet in an empty classroom and just pray for an hour. I had never been around anybody like that. So then one day he says, where do you guys go to church? And I told him, and he said, you ought to come over and just visit where I am one time. So we went over, our family went over and visited, and here's a whole group of teenagers that are like Raymond, that really love God. And I had never seen that in my life. And I thought, wow. I mean, these kids were talking about the Lord all the time. And I thought, man, so I'm talking to my dad about, actually, I was pretty excited. And so I'm with a friend of mine named Devin Ward. We were going to go, we used to shoot basketball together, been friends for years. So he said, I know where there's a church, they got basketball goals in the parking lot, and it's lit at night. We can go over there and shoot ball. So we got in our car, and we pulled up in this church parking lot, and they had two goals. One of them was a standard 10-foot goal, and the other one was at about 8 feet. So if we wanted to feel like we were in the NBA, we could dunk on the 8-foot one, So anyway, so we're shooting ball. Now, it's late. We're not disturbing anybody because it's in a church complex area, so there's no houses right there. And it's probably 11:30 maybe, and a car pulls into the parking lot. And these guys, about our age, get out. And I thought, oh, I wonder if this is going to be a problem. And they get out, and they come over, and there's a guy there, I know their names now. There's a guy there named Kendall Armstrong and a guy named DJ Weed, and I can't remember who else with them. I knew those two guys. Yeah, I didn't know them then. Anyway, they come in, and they're carrying New Testaments in their hand, and they come over and they put their hand out and they say, how you doing? They introduce themselves, And they said, look, we're just out looking for folks and just wondering, do you guys know for sure if you died today, you go to heaven? And I go, yeah. He goes, how you know? And I said, well, I trusted Jesus when I was 8 years old. He said, great, what about you? And Devin says, yeah, I got saved when such and such. Okay, we'll see y'all. And they getting ready to get back in the car. And I go, wait a minute. What are y'all doing? They said, we're just driving around witnessing to folks. I said, when do you do this? They said, we do this all the time. I didn't realize, and I said, where do you go to church? They said, right here. That was the church I had visited with Raymond. But there was a lot of kids. You know, there was 250 kids in the youth department. I didn't know them all, you know. And so I thought, So I go back over there again. We wind up joining that church. And I'm in the midst of a group of young people that are on fire for God. Now, I look back on that, and I see they had a lot of zeal. They didn't know the things that probably we should have known, but they knew they loved God and they wanted to do something. They wanted to serve Him. And they were not ashamed of it. These kids, I mean, I'm trying to describe it to you. So, why am I telling you this story? Because that provoked me. It made me look at my own Christian life and think, how important is God to me? How big a deal is this to me? Because they were not infatuated with the world. They were infatuated with Jesus. And so I became part of that. But it wasn't, you know what, I can't tell you, it was very different being in that group than any other group I had ever been a part of. Because in the other groups, it was almost as though, man, why are we have to come here? In this group, it was very, very different. Paul is trying to take what he's doing with these Gentiles and do a very similar thing with Israel. He is trying to provoke them in two ways. The first one says to provoke them to jealousy. Because I have to tell you, I can remember going home and praying at night and saying to God, I wish I had what those kids have. I remember saying that. I didn't know enough to know how do you get there? How do you get from point A to point B? Now, there were those in my life who thought that was a bit of a fad. It will wear off. It was a bit disappointing because then I changed from going to Louisiana Tech and being in pre-law to actually now going to a Bible school and training for ministry. And for some in my family, that was a disappointment because they thought I was throwing away my opportunity to do something with my life for something I was going to get over when the new wore off. Well, I am going to be 65 this year, and the new has not worn off yet. So I think I'm in good shape. But I do understand that now. I didn't understand it then, but I do understand. There's lots of folks that just get on the bandwagon for all the hoopla, and then pretty soon, well, something shiny's over here, and now they're off over here. I've seen that. I'm telling you all of that to say, for me, when I read this verse, that always pops into my head because I have been provoked in such a way. I've also been provoked by that same crowd in the second way. This is a provoking to jealousy, but in just a few verses, Paul is going to say, provoke Israel to emulation. Do you know what emulation is? Do you know what it means to emulate someone? Yeah, to copy them, to do what they're doing. I got provoked that same way again. I wanted to be a part of that. And so you know what? One day I was one of the guys riding in that car, and we're pulling in at gas stations and basketball courts, and I can't tell you how many different places I have witnessed to people in all kinds of situations through my life, and even through those years. I can remember that. Since I've gotten on this, and I've only got a couple minutes left here, Devin, the guy I was shooting ball with, I remember we were riding down the 70th Street was one of the big streets in Shreveport, very busy. And we were riding down 3 lanes each direction. And I saw a guy walking on the side of the road. And I told Devin, I said, hey, pull over, pull over. He said, how am I going to pull over? It's a curb. I go, I don't know, slow down and get up on the curb and get off the road. I need a witness to this guy. And Devin goes, we're going to witness to him? And I go, yeah. And he goes, are you going to do it? I said, well, I thought you would do it. He said, I've never done it. And I said, well, I've never done it either. He said, well, I said, just pull over. We'll figure it out. So he pulls over. So just imagine, here you are, a guy walking down the street, all this traffic going, a car bumps over the curb about 100 feet up ahead of you, and 2 guys pile out of the car and start walking towards you. I mean, this guy had a look on his face like he didn't know if he wanted to run and get away or what, but he slowed down. And so when I came up, I'd use the same line that I'd heard all them use. If you died today, do you know where you would spend eternity? Now think about that from his perspective. If I do what today? What's about to happen to me? I'm sure it was a little disconcerting. I only knew the Roman road plan of salvation. I wouldn't do that today. I think I would do something better. But you know what? I fumbled my way. Here's how nervous I was. I had my New Testament. This is not a New Testament. That's my New Testament. And I thought, okay, Romans 3:23. I was so nervous, I couldn't find Romans. I mean, I found myself over to Revelation. I thought, okay. And I'm going back this way, and now I'm in the Gospels. And I am so nervous. Honestly, I thought the guy was witnessing to would go, here, give me that. Here you go. There you go, Book of Romans. There you go. I just couldn't. Finally, I found Romans. I stammer and stutter my way through this presentation of the gospel. It was pathetic. At the end, I almost wanted to go, you don't want to get saved, do you? That's almost how I wanted to end it. And when I got through, I said to the guy, would you like to trust Jesus as your Savior? And that's the first time I really looked at him. I was so nervous and looking at the verses and trying to get it right. He had tears in his eyes and he went, I sure would. I almost went, really? You're going to respond to that? Come on, it gets better than that. Hold out for a bit. But I go, well, let's just kneel down right here and you can trust the Lord. And we did that right there beside that busy highway. And when I got back up, the guy shook my hand and said, thank you for telling me this. I don't know what was going on in his life, but when we got back in the car, Devin looked at me and he went, I'm doing the next one. You know what was happening to him? He was being provoked. And you know what? And from that time, it changed with me to be able to be in on something like that. When Paul is doing this thing with Gentiles, he knows that what is happening is so glorious and so marvelous that if they get a chance to really see it, they'll be thinking about that the same way I was thinking about it. They'll be provoked. I mean, he wasn't thinking about me. I didn't come along until later. I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about with this. So, this jealousy. The Oxford English Dictionary, I know you know what it is, but look. The state of mind arising from the suspicion, apprehension, or knowledge of rivalry, Fear of being supplanted in the affection of a beloved person. Here's Israel, and you know what no doubt they're thinking? We're going to get supplanted by the Gentiles. What if God loves them more than He loves us? That's what they're being provoked to. Now, back to Romans 11:12. Now, if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, and we've talked about that God is now going to work directly with Gentiles before Israel gets her fullness. Before that. So now let's look at both of them together, and we'll polish these up so we can move on. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Fall how? Well, in this one, have they stumbled that they should fall? When he says God forbid, he's saying they haven't fallen permanently, but rather through their fall. So they did fall, didn't they? Yeah. Salvation is come unto the Gentiles. Can I quote Paul from Acts chapter 13, Acts chapter 15, and Acts chapter 28? And they will hear it. We're going to carry this message to the Gentiles. And man, were the Gentiles hearing that message. And by the way, the other good part about this is I'm going to get to provoke Israel to jealousy in the midst of this. Verse 12. Now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and it was, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, those twice dead Gentiles that were without hope and without God, God is now going to work with them. If that produced riches, their fall and diminishing, he ends with, how much more their fullness? When they finally do become what they're supposed to become, how glorious do you think that will be? Do you see what God is saying? If I can take their fall and diminishing and produce this out of it, what do you think I can produce out of their fullness? It's going to be a glorious, glorious thing. So I'm just going to focus on that last verse here, and let me put this up. That is the fullness. And what is that fullness? It is the fulfillment of all the covenants and promises to Israel once they become that great nation in the kingdom. There's our four terms. The stumbling, the fall, the diminishing, and the future fullness of Israel. Okay, perfect place for us to stop and take a break. Then we'll come back and we'll move on through Romans 11.